Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour. We're now in the 16th year of Chunggi, 9th month, and the 25th day by the Heavenly calendar. Tim Milver sitting in for the second king of Cheongguk, Gyeonggi-moon. And let's get right to our trip around the kingdom, see what is going on. We have freezing temperatures in Chongpyeong, Tennessee, 32 degrees and clear at the moment, and high of 65 today, partly sunny and pleasant. And tonight, partly cloudy, low of 42 at father's hometown of Cheongju in North Pyongan Province, what is today North Korea. Right now, 35 and clear, and getting down to 31 tonight. Continued clear skies, and then tomorrow, blend of sun and clouds, high of 51. At the Cheongguk Palace in northeast Pennsylvania, mostly cloudy and 35, and getting up to 48 today, times of clouds and sun with a passing flurry. Tonight, partly cloudy and low of 31. And then at the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, 59 and mostly cloudy. Getting up to 83 today, mostly cloudy, breezy, and very warm. Tonight, breezy this evening, otherwise mainly clear, low of 61. And then at the Korean Palace in Korea, in Suncheon, Korea, it is now 51 and clear, getting down to 37 tonight, partly cloudy, freezing temperatures in the normally colder spots. Tomorrow, sunny and comfortable, high of 65. And then at the Gunma Palaces in Japan, mostly clear at 56, clear to partly cloudy, low of 44 tonight. Tomorrow, plenty of sunshine, high of 64. Guangzhou in Guangdong Province, clear and low of 65. Right now, it's clear and 73. And then tonight, a low of 65 and clear. Tomorrow, hazy sun, high of 83. So it looks like everybody's pretty clear today. That's good. That is good. Okay, let's go to Father's Word. And here we are now in the chapter, or the book, I should say, on true love, chapter 1, which is titled, What is True Love? And I'm in section 2 of chapter 1. So I traveled 5 oceans in the 6 continents, and continuously I was preaching the path of love. 사랑이 없는 사막과 같은 인류 앞에 사랑의 빛을 비추어 주고자 했던 것입니다. So I wanted to stand before humanity, which is like a desert without love, and shine the light of love on them. 인간이 궁극적으로 가야 할 길이 사랑의 피안이라고 한다면, so if the path that human beings must ultimately go, must ultimately travel, is the he's spirit world. His meaning is spirit world here, but he says pian. Pian means the other shore. It's interesting. The Egyptians thought of the spirit world as the whatever existed across on the other side of the Nile, and it's kind of the same thing. And I think there was in traditional Korean mythology, I think there is actually a river, and there's a guy that sort of takes you across. He ferries you across to the other side, and then once you're on the other side, then you can't come back. So anyway, the other side. Father uses that here. He says the other side, but he's talking about the spirit world. So since well, where am I here? 궁극적으로 가야 할 길이 사랑의 피안이라면. So if a path that humanity must ultimately go is the path to the spirit world of love, or to the other shore of love, the most important thing for human beings today must be a lighthouse of love. A lighthouse, tunde can be a lighthouse. I think it can also be a lamp, but I think a lighthouse is probably correct here. Lighthouse of love. So it is only that lighthouse of love that can guide humanity to the land of the original homeland. Praise God. Praise God for listening and doing this morning. Yes. Love, 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 love. And where do we complete love? How are we supposed to learn how to love? Well, we have sort of a training ground for love, right? And that is, of course, the family. That is the value of family. So if someone is saying, I'm not going to get married, I'm not going to have children, what are they doing? Well, they're denying themselves, that training ground, that opportunity to develop their love and ultimately to complete their love in the four realms of Shimjong. And I'm sure you know what they are. And then four realms of Shimjong, the three generation kingship, or the three great kingship, either one, and also the realm of the royal family. Um, need to have a family in order to do that, to complete your love. So that's the kind of I guess, a kind of a selfish reason to have a family, but also um, uh, we received, you and I received a life from our parents, and then it would be very selfish of us not to pass that life on. Right? And someone may say, "Well, I don't want to, I don't want to bring a child into this messed up world." Well, maybe that, and definitely that child can um, improve this world. While you have a child, and then you uh, pass on your values to that child, and that child can create a family that will contribute to the building of God's kingdom on this earth. And so there really is no excuse not to have a family, not to have a child. All right. Okay. And even if, I don't want to get married because I see my parents were fighting all the time. Nope, sorry. You can't blame it on your parents. You cannot blame it on your parents. Okay. Some of the most wonderful people in the world have come from very, uh, what shall I say, difficult environments, difficult family environments. All right. So cannot use that as an excuse. All right, let's see here. Couple of things. Let's see, I'm going to cover today. I'd like to cover U.S.-Korea relations and also the uh, China-Korea relations as well. But before that, let's go to this one, because this talks about something that I've been mentioning, and that is, what does it mean that 42 million Americans depend on SNAP for groceries? And this is an opinion written by a member of the Heritage Foundation. So let's take a look. Let's take a look here. The longest government shutdown in history has come to an end. One major pressure point in the 43-day congressional stalemate was the exhaustion of funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP for short, or more familiarly, I can't get my tongue to go around today. Food stamps. There, thank you. It's not. Let's leave out those L's and R's, shall we? Due to the shutdown. Given the massive size of SNAP, nearly 42 million, or 1 in 8 people in the U.S. are on the program. The shutdown left many people without benefits and uncertain when they might receive them. And well, I guess some people, and maybe it was many, but not everyone was without benefits. Not all the 42 million. Anyway, I think this will explain how. The entire drama over SNAP could have been avoided, not to mention the entire shutdown, if Democrats would have decided weeks ago to stop blocking the clean continuing resolution Republicans had passed in the House of Representatives. Leaving SNAP beneficiaries uncertain about receiving benefits isn't good policy, but it's not the only bad policy surrounding SNAP that Congress should address. The 1 in 8 Americans rely on the federal government for food assistance reflects the failure of SNAP to promote upward mobility, to break the cycle of poverty, in other words. Um, it's a safety net, and that's great, except that you can't spend your entire life in the net. you got to get out of that net. You got to stand on your own 2 feet at some point. And the fact that there are 1 in 8 Americans are in this position is a problem. There's something wrong with the policy. I think this person agrees with me on that. And SNAP is just one part of a much larger welfare system that now includes roughly 90 programs at a cost of well over $1 trillion a year. This system is leaving people dependent rather than helping them improve their lives and exchange welfare benefits for self-reliance. So, yes, let's get the government out of welfare. Obviously, this is not working. The war on poverty began in the 1960s, and it's not really working all that well. Let's take a change in the poverty poverty level. Okay. Okay, here we go. Poverty level. Okay, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, there is a poverty line that changes every year. Of course, that's understandable because of inflation, so it has to keep up with inflation. And I'm not. Anyway, let's see. Has poverty decreased in the U.S.? Let's look at that. And what is the poverty rate in the U.S.? Okay, here, I think maybe this will show us something here. Oh, United States poverty rate, 1959 to 2015. Okay, I guess is 2015 the best we can do? 2019, all right, come on. Must be a better one than that. Okay. Child poverty rate. 2020. All right. Here we go. Well, I guess that's pretty good. 2020. All right. So, look at that. Yeah. COVID, I guess, right? COVID right there. But you can see dotted line shows the poverty level would have been 16.7% in 2020 without government stimulus, aid, and unemployment benefits. I see, so it would have been. All right. But anyway, you can see that since 1980, so roughly 40 years, the poverty level has not dramatically changed, right? Here, what is this, 2018? Okay, 2018, and that would have been during the first Trump administration. The poverty level actually was at its lowest, according to this, in the 40-year period. But there has not been it's not like it's going down. You would think that all the money that we're spending on poverty, it would be going down like that, that fewer and fewer people would be dependent on the government, but that's not the case. Oops. Tell me okay, all right. Yeah, I'm going to get to South Korea in just a minute. All right, let's see. So anyway, $1 trillion a year on various welfare programs, 90 programs. So, of course, the Eternal Constitution, as you surely must know by now, because I've said it so many times, says that the government has to stay out of welfare, that this has to be handled, and by implication, it's saying that it has to be handled by the private sector. Okay. And I think if it were handled by the private sector, people would be, there would be more opportunities for people to get out of poverty and actually have an income and start actually being a positive contributor to the economy rather than a negative detractor. Okay. Policymakers have fashioned welfare policy on the notion that poverty is primarily a material problem, one that can be solved with one-way government transfers of cash and benefits. Focusing on the symptoms of poverty rather than the causes has led to ever-increasing welfare spending and tragically also to a decreased connection to those things that protect against poverty, And what are they? Work and family stability. Family stability. Family stability. I guess this person could not bring herself to say um, uh, two-parent family, heterosexual two-parent family. Family stability. What does family stability mean, right? It means that there's a two-parent family, and probably it's better for it to be heterosexual. SNAP has ballooned over the years due to policymakers loosening the financial criteria, creating loopholes that allow states to bypass asset tests for applicants. In other words, you don't have to tell people what kind of assets you have. You could have $1 million in the bank, and they're not going to ask you. And most recently, the major Biden-era boost to SNAP benefits. Yeah, the Democrats want to increase the number of people dependent on the government because then they vote for the party that has given them that increased dependence. SNAP spending spiked during COVID due to temporary funding increases. Then, when those funding increases were about to expire, the Biden administration made permanent boosts to SNAP benefits via executive overreach. Today, SNAP spending is well above pre-pandemic levels. The One Big Beautiful Bill made some important reforms to SNAP to move it in the right direction, including improved work requirements. But there is still more to do to get SNAP on the right track. During the shutdown, some states vowed to use some of their own dollars to provide November SNAP benefits. Congress should make this a permanent policy. Yeah, so if the states want to do it, go ahead. One of the reasons SNAP and the rest of the U.S. welfare system has become so large is precisely because of how the funding currently operates. Federal politicians hand dollars to state bureaucrats who then turn around and distribute the benefits. There is little incentive for states to see that the benefits are being used appropriately when states don't have a skin in the game. So in other words, there's ample opportunity, even motivation or incentive for fraud. The states don't care. It's not their money. States contributing their own dollars to SNAP would increase the likelihood that the program serves those who need it most and that people do not languish there needlessly. So, okay, a step in the right direction would be to have the states do it, but somewhere down the line, you should have government out of this entirely. And you could have churches, communities, and or you could have a community chest or something like that. In other words, a sort of each little town or village could have sort of a fund that people contribute to, and it can be given to people who are truly in need, but then they'll be encouraged to find a way to get out of that dependency. And I think in churches as well, as a church community within the community, but also people who come to the churches. And some people do reach out to churches. When I was working in Newfoundland, 2 or 3 times, I think we had people come to the church and asking for help. One time I got I guess it was near the end of the year, I got a phone call. And the woman said, "Do you have programs?" And I thought, well, yeah, we have some programs left over from the last holy day, but somehow I didn't think that was the kind of program she was looking for. And I was confused there for a while. And as programs, I said, well, what kind of programs are you looking for? And she said, I need help paying my rent. Oh, those programs. I said, it didn't really click with me at first. But I had to tell her, no, we don't have those programs. But we also had one time a car full, a family, I guess, they look like a family anyway, uh, driving down 191 there and stopped in at the church and they said, we need gas for our car. And so I took them to the gas station there and filled their tank with my card and also invited them to lunch. I guess it was at Spanky's. Of course, I never heard from them again, and I don't think the church has heard from them. But they were passing through. They said they were on their way to Tennessee, I think, or Kentucky, or maybe it was Kentucky. I'm not sure. But anyway, churches are expected to help, right? They're expected to be able to offer help to people, and that is one function that a church can play in society. And I think that function can be and should be expanded. The Catholic Church, which was in our building prior to us, had a food bank operating out of the back there, and uh, that food bank was closed down, and it moved to the what's that church? The Moravian Church? I think, yeah, the Moravian Church now operates that food bank instead of the Catholic Church. So churches do that already, and that kind of function can be expanded. Okay, and so it's that now states taking more financial responsibility for SNAP would also help avoid problems like uncertainty about receiving benefits whenever there's a congressional budget showdown. And you know what? Um, I think they've funded SNAP now through the end of next September, but the government's going to actually probably have another budget showdown at the end of January because most of the government spending is going to stop again at the end of January, and we'll have to go through this whole thing again. But I think they did fund SNAP through the end of September. So yes, the government shutdown is over and SNAP will resume, but SNAP should not remain on its current path. Congress should continue what it started earlier this year and reform SNAP, along with many other welfare programs to promote upward mobility for Americans. Well, reform, I think, is to put it into private hands. And as a first step, for example, the government can take the money, that $1 trillion that they are spending right now, and distribute it to many private organizations, right? And then for the first year, just do it widely, sort of cast the net widely. And then after 1 year, you can evaluate to see who distributed the money most efficiently. In other words, which organization spent the least amount of money on their own administration, right? And then actually passed out the most amount of money, or in terms of percentages. And then the ones that are least efficient can be gradually weeded out. But I think through steps like that, there can be a process that would lead to the privatization of welfare. And I know the left is not going to like that because they want people to be dependent on the government. And they say, if we do that, then there'll be all sorts of discrimination. Well, if there is discrimination, well, then there are laws against that, aren't there? So they can crack down on that. But it's important to have these programs administered efficiently, but also in a way that encourages people to get back on their own 2 feet. So as quickly as possible. Okay, all right. The war against poverty was started good intentions, I suppose, or maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, people supported it with good intentions, but it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. And then when people use that Bible verse of Jesus, the poor will always be with you. So they use that to justify the fact that the war against poverty is not working very well at all. So it's not good. No. Okay. All right then. And here then also with regard to the the national debt, which is sort of in the news recently. Economic, experts are warning again, and they've been doing this over and over and over and over again, that action needs to be taken on this $38 trillion national debt. It's going to be 39 soon, and then 40 not too long after that. The United States national debt currently standing at $38 trillion and exceeding 120% of annual economic output, that's the GDP, demands action, experts warn. Well, that's nothing new. Experts have been warning this now for decades. The nonpartisan Peter G. Peterson Foundation gathered a series of distinguished national economists and historians from outside the foundation in a collection of essays published Thursday. They analyzed risks to U.S. economic strength, dollar dominance, and global leadership. The experts also explored the national debt's impact on interest, inflation, and financial markets, with some characterizing this moment in history as a crisis. Collectively, they argue that the nation is operating under a dangerous fiscal gamble. Assessing the mounting liabilities, Council on Foreign Relations President Emeritus Richard Haas and NYU Professor Carolyn Kissane delivered a stark judgment. In simpler terms, we are guilty of spending our rainy day fund in sunny weather, meaning the government has little dry powder left to fund a major military effort or stimulate the economy during a crisis. The national debt goes up quite a bit during a war. So if, for example, we had to actually go to war with China, for example, or somebody else, where's the money going to come from? Well, of course, the government would have to just print the money. In other words, would be borrowing the money, and then the Federal Reserve would print the money. But interest rates would go sky high. And back in the early 1980s, I think the 30-year, was it 30-year? I think it was 30-year U.S. bond was something like 30% or 20%, whereas today it's somewhere around 4%, right? So, but that was possible because the debt to GDP at that time was about 30%, I think. Today it's 120%, about 30, 35, something like that back then. So the debt crisis has reached a critical threshold. The U.S. now spends approximately $1 trillion annually on servicing its debt. Hey, wait a second. Where can we get $1 trillion? Where were we just talking about? We're spending $1 trillion on welfare. Okay, so if we didn't spend $1 trillion on welfare, then that would fund the interest on the national debt. Just saying. I figure that surpasses the country's spending on defense. Economist Heather Long wrote that in the 2020s, the 2020s are fast becoming the era of big permanent deficits, and with annual budget gaps projected to remain high, around 6% of GDP. Okay, budget gaps. In other words, the federal government, a budget gap. That's the gap, right? The gap, the difference between the revenue, mostly tax revenue, and expenditure. Even though unemployment is low, a startling departure from U.S. historical norms. So economists warn that solutions that worked in the past, such as the post-World War II debt reduction or the 1990s surpluses, are unavailable today. Economist Barry Eichengreen explained that the debt's steep decline after World War II was supported by a highly favorable interest rate growth rate differential, low real interest rates, and fast GDP growth. Likewise, the 1990s reduction was fueled by the peace dividend because the Soviet Union had fallen apart, enabling deep cuts in defense spending. None of these facilitating conditions as present today. Eichengreen, for his part, noted that current security threats from Russia, Iran, and the South China Sea create pressure for defense spending increases, not cuts. Compounding the problem is political polarization, which is cited as the most robust determinant working against successful fiscal consolidation. With major entitlement programs politically protected, this fiscal gridlock leaves raising additional revenue as the most viable path, given the United States is a low tax revenue economy compared to its peers. You heard that, right? Taxes are going up, or at least that's what these people are recommending. Not just recommending, but they're saying it's the only way. Well, there's also inflation, right? If you create more inflation, then that reduces the value of the debt, not the amount, but the value, and it becomes more and more easy to repay or to end the service. There is that option to bring about inflation. And that may be what President Trump has in mind. I don't know, because he keeps pressuring the Fed to lower rates, and when he nominates and probably gets a Senate approval on a new federal or Fed chairman, Fed board chairman, Federal Reserve Board chairman. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once here. Federal Reserve Board chairman in May. He's going to have someone. He's going to pick someone who is a strong supporter of lower interest rates. I think that's pretty clear right now. So lower interest rates are likely to bring about higher inflation. And President Trump has said, well, if there's inflation, then they can just raise the rates when that time comes. Well, it's not that simple, I think. I'm not an expert, but I don't think you can just turn it on and off like that. The debt is framed not just as a financial strain, but as a direct threat to security. Haas and Hussein emphasized that money spent on borrowing is money not available for more productive purposes, from discretionary domestic spending to defense, the classic crowding out phenomenon. Other underfunded programs, including cybersecurity and public health, hollow out internal capacities that protect the homeland, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go, though, to this. I want to go to this one, showing who owns all this debt. And actually, 20% of that 38 trillion is owned by other government agencies. And the government, in other words, lends money to itself and to other agencies. And that's about 20%. And the public and everybody else, also including foreign countries, own 80% of that debt. So 20% of 38 trillion is what, 7.6 trillion? So held by the public, 80%, that would be what? 38 minus 30.4 trillion, 30.4 trillion. And then you see that the Federal Reserve System, now the Federal Reserve itself has a 4.5 trillion, it looks like, according to this, of the national debt. Okay, 4.5 trillion, about $4.556 trillion. So that means that let me bring this up so you can see the Federal Reserve System, about $4.5 trillion. And the Federal Reserve System then collects interest on that debt. But then they use that interest for their own sort of operating expenses. In other words, the salaries for all their hundreds of PhDs and Jerome Powell's car service and all that kind of stuff and everything else. And then theoretically, if they have stuff left over, if they have any money left over after all those expenses, then they're supposed to return that money to the Treasury Department. That just gets swept away to the Treasury Department. Except that currently, the Fed is operating at a deficit. They're losing money. Can you imagine that? all these, they're losing money. Somehow I find that, I don't know, that's maybe that's I don't know, that's a good symbol of the age, I suppose, that the Federal Reserve is losing money. But anyway, they own $4.5 trillion. This is as of when? As of March 2025. Okay, this is earlier this year. That's pretty recent. Mutual funds, $4.4 trillion. And this, mutual funds are owned by people who are investing in their 401ks and the IRAs and other kind of stuff here. Depository institutions and then state and local governments, they own 1.7 trillion. Pension funds and then insurance companies and other domestic $5.7 trillion. And then Japan, among foreign countries, Japan has the highest, 1.1 trillion, and then the UK now is number 2. China used to be number 2, but they've been selling off, or either, I don't know if they're selling off, but they've been, as their bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds mature, they're not buying new ones, they're buying gold instead, it looks like. 765 billion, and then 30 plus other countries, $6.3 trillion. So they're saying that the point they're trying to make is that 2/3 of public debt is held by domestic holders. So they're trying to say, well, don't have to worry because it's all held by us. But I think the article that we just read a while ago makes a very good point that wouldn't it be nice if we could be, instead of spending $1 trillion a year on interest, if we could be spending $1 trillion a year on more productive things? Okay, yeah, the interest is going to all these people. It's going to into these retirement accounts, these mutual fund holders, and the state and local governments are collecting the interest and other things. So that's nice, but still, we would think that there'd be other ways of doing it, other places to spend that money. And so Japan and UK, China, I suppose they're using their 765, the interest on 765 billion, but let's see, 765 billion. And I don't know what the average interest is right now. It's not, the 10 years at 4%, but most of the debt is actually short term. So let's say it's 1%, 165, okay, times this billion, okay, 0.01. Okay, that would be, so well, that's still 7 billion, $7,650,000,000 if we say 1% average interest. I think that's a pretty conservative estimate. So they're getting at least $7 billion from the US just by holding our debt. And it may be more than that. And of course, when the Fed raises rates, when they raise the Fed fund rates and all the interest rates go up, then the government has to, when they roll over their debt, because the debt is mostly short term, when they roll over the debt, then they have to paying more and more and more and more and more. And that's how we got to 1 trillion in the first place. So anyway, raising taxes, that's what politicians, they'd rather eat glass than have to raise taxes, because they get voted out of office that way. So the easiest way for them to deal with this is inflation, to inflate the debt away, or not away completely, but to make it less valuable. All right. But then who does that hurt? Well, it hurts mostly the middle and lower class, because the upper class, they have assets, they have stocks, they have land, real estate, they have gold, they have other stuff. And as inflation hits, asset prices go up. But as inflation hits, the value of people's savings in the bank, 401ks and IRAs, especially, if they're not keeping up with inflation, then it's going to go down. Right? And you got to figure, my 401k, I'm invested in stocks and everything else like that. Well, take a look, all right? And don't look at necessarily the official inflation figure from the government, but look at the actual inflation figure and how much probably you can expect to have to spend in your retirement, and then look at the effect that inflation is having on that, okay, and the purchasing power on your money. I think I was sharing that, wasn't I? Was I not? I think that's what I was talking about just now. Federal Reserve, 4.5 trillion, and the mutual funds, 4.4 trillion, and then Japan, 1.1 trillion, UK, 79 billion, and China, 765 billion. All right, then let's see. Okay, now let's go to Korea, US, and we'll get to Korea, China in a minute. All right, so good news, I guess. South Korea and the United States have signed a memorandum of understanding on Seoul's US $350 billion investment pledge made in return for lowering US tariffs, the industry ministry said Friday. The MOU was electronically signed by the two sides, okay? And on October 29th, the two sides reached an agreement on the details of Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge made in exchange for lower US tariffs. Under the final terms, investments will consist of $200 billion in cash installments, with an annual cap set at $20 billion. This is what I've been saying, right? That they said that Korea would provide $20 billion a year over 10 years, and an additional $150 billion for bilateral shipbuilding cooperation. The MOU on the envisioned investment stipulates that the two countries will select projects to be funded by Seoul's $200 billion package before U.S. President Donald Trump's term ends in January 2029. The $200 billion will be funneled into projects related to advanced industries outlined in a joint fact sheet released by both Seoul and Washington earlier in the day. Such sectors include energy, semiconductor, pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, among others. Kim said the two countries will establish a consultation committee, and they'll give priority to South Korean firms. Okay, and let's see now. There's something else here that's important. And let's see here. Because here we go. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay. So they also reiterated the submarine plan, the nuclear-powered submarine. And Japan, as you can imagine, say, well, me too, we want one too. That was it. That was part of the fact sheet that previous article mentioned, but they omitted the question of where the nuclear-powered vessels, it looks like, are to be built. Okay. Oh, I want my money. And let's try, where was that? Let's try, okay, okay. And then also, what is it, nuclear? The reprocessing of a nuclear fuel. Here we go. South Korea wins U.S. support to reprocess spent nuclear fuel and enrich uranium, according to Lee Jae-myung, the president here. And that's a kind of a big thing because it has to do with the nuclear proliferation. President Lee Jae-myung said Friday that Korea has secured U.S. support for expanding Seoul's authority over uranium enrichment and spent nuclear fuel reprocessing. I'm wondering what Lee Jae-myung is doing here. Is he playing the U.S. and China off of each other, or at least the U.S. off of China? That may be. And that might be how, because South Korea's been trying to get U.S. permission for this nuclear power sub for about 30 years. So how is it that Lee Jae-myung all of a sudden got it through just a few months after he got into office? And not only that, but also expanding Korea's authority over uranium enrichment and spent nuclear fuel reprocessing. Those are two pretty big steps all at once. And I'm a little bit curious as to what's going on in the background here. He described the development as a highly significant step forward as the nation seeks to build its first nuclear-powered submarine. So the U.S. and the Korean U.S. have agreed to move forward with the construction of nuclear-powered submarines, a long-time goal, right? In addition, the two sides will explore institutional changes that would allow not only U.S. commercial vessels, but even U.S. Navy ships to be built in Korea, he's added, calling the move a foundation for both nations to strengthen their shipbuilding industries. And I think there's some reluctance in the U.S., and understandably, U.S. Navy ships built so close to China. I don't know about that, and we'll see. Throughout the talks, building our nuclear submarine in the U.S. was not discussed. The precondition of all conversations between the two leaders was that Korea's nuclear submarine would be built in Korea. We said our request for U.S. cooperation was focused on gaining access to nuclear fuel. Previously there was some talk about the shipyard in Philadelphia being refurbished or somehow being improved so that South Korea could go in there and build the nuclear submarine there. But it looks like that was not actually on the table. That was just sort of the media speculation. And so forth and so on, okay. And Lee is emphasizing that the joint document reaffirmed Washington's commitment to maintaining the presence of U.S. forces and to supporting the transfer of wartime operational control back to Korea. I would not trust Lee Jae-myung on that. I think it's very possible that he is just lying intentionally, and that he's just sort of waiting for the right time to start the process of excluding U.S. forces from Korea. His term will go until 2030 because it's a 5-year term. It's a single 5-year term. He cannot be reelected. But that means that he has about a year and a half after President Trump leaves office to do some mischief in terms of U.S. forces Korea. So yeah, I think something like that. Yeah, I think Korea emphasizes determination to take the lead in defending the Korean Peninsula through strengthened defense capabilities and the transition of wartime operational control. And Washington expressed strong support for these efforts. And different administrations in Washington have for a while now supported the idea of transferring wartime operational control to South Korea. And it's been the South Koreans that have kept saying, oh, because there were deadlines a couple of times at least. I know there were deadlines. Okay, let's do it by this date. Let's do it by this date. And South Korea is the one, as I understand, that has been extending those deadlines. And so I'm sure the U.S. at the Pentagon is more than happy to give Korea another deadline to accomplish this. Talks on regaining OPCON have been at the center of security discussions between the allies, with Lee aiming to complete the full transition within his 5-year term. But for Lee Jae-myung, that is a part of the process for asking, coming to the point where he can ask, where South Korea can ask U.S. forces to leave the peninsula. And I think that is what his plan is. The past conservative administrations, they were also working towards self-defense, the ability to defend the nation by themselves on their own. But they had a different, of course, they were committed to the U.S.-South Korean alliance. And Lee Jae-myung, no matter what he says, he's not committed to the U.S.-South Korean alliance. And if we believe that, then I have a bridge in Yeongdeungpo that you can buy. Okay. All right. Let's see here. All right. So that's all we need to do on that. And so this, I'm going to go to the Global Times, believe it or not. Global Times is a communist Chinese newspaper run by the CCP. It's a mouthpiece of the CCP. But there's a reason that I'm using them. South Korea moves to tighten hate speech laws amid rising anti-China rallies and public concern. Okay, well, public concern. Yeah, the communists in South Korea, they are concerned. Yes, that is true. Okay, they're not lying here. All right. Yes, and first I should tell you that, well, everybody knows that Koreans and Japanese don't get along. But what perhaps is a little bit less known is that Koreans and Chinese, the relationship is actually even worse. Many times I've been told by Koreans, and this is they're boasting when they say this. They're boasting there when they say this. They say, "Do you know?" And this may or may not be true, but at least the fact that they say it is indicative of something. Do you know that Korea is the only country in the world where that does not have a thriving overseas Chinese community? And to them, this is a boast. All right, yeah, we've kept them out. It is true that there is no Chinatown like in San Francisco or in New York, or just about any large city in the world. You can probably has some kind of Chinatown or a thriving overseas Chinese community. And uh, at least at least until let's see, 5, 10 years ago, I guess, uh, it was true that you could not find such a community in Korea and South Korea. Today, I think it may have changed. I think because uh, economic ties between Korea and China have become much closer. So I think probably today, but for a long time that was the case. And of course, historically, uh, Koreans will, or some Koreans will tell you that during their 5,000-year history, they've been invaded 1,000 times, and if you look at it, most of those invasions were from China, and uh, and well, what they count as invasions. Sometimes, if a pirate ship attacks a coastal village, they count that as an invasion sometimes. So the 1,000 times is a little bit maybe inflated, or at least it's not exactly the way that you would normally think about it. But anyway, adding to that fact, of course, is that China, communist China, was supporting North Korea during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. And actually, if it had not been for communist China's intervention, the Korean Peninsula would have been united under the Seoul government at that time. MacArthur and the UN forces had defeated the communist North Korean Communist Army within 3 months or so. I guess three to 4 months anyway. Uh, so. If you are in South Korea and talking to South Koreans about China, uh, oftentimes you will hear some negative things about them. And you don't often hear positive things about China or Chinese. That's for sure. Even though a lot of South Koreans are, of course, doing business in China, and of course, Chinese tourists are a major impetus to the South Korean economy. Uh, but recently, the both China and South Korea have agreed to um, offer no visa entry to each other's people. So already South Koreans can go to China without a visa, and I think starting from the end of or actually from last September, Chinese could come to Korea without visa. And I think that program is being expanded, and there's a great deal of vocal opposition to that arrangement within South Korean society, and there is also among conservatives there's a great deal of suspicion that China is involved in manipulating South Korean elections, or even that the election rallies in favor of Lee Jae-myung may have been attended by a lot of Chinese citizens who had been sent over from China for that purpose. There's a lot of speculation and suspicion in that way, and that actual election fraud may have been committed by Chinese citizens. And so there are sort of ongoing demonstrations each weekend by the conservatives and also by the communists, but the conservatives during their demonstrations bring up these issues, and they say that they are opposed to visa-free entry by Chinese citizens into South Korea. And so that's what Lee Jae-myung is addressing here. And he's saying that, well, all this is hate speech, right? And of course, if someone wants to burn the U.S. flag, no one's going to say anything about that. But people who have defaced the Chinese flag have been detained by the police in the past. I think South Korea is accelerating legislative efforts to curb hate speech and disinformation, as President Lee Jae-myung and senior ministers call for stronger penalties against expressions of hatred based on race or nationality. And that's according to reports from Korea Times, Mail Business newspaper, and the Chosun Ilbo. During a cabinet meeting on Monday, and I talked about this a little bit already, but here lawmakers are proposing a new bill to cite recent anti-China rallies held by certain groups. Certain groups. Well, it's not the progressives that are doing it, not the leftists that are doing this, it's the conservatives. And so this is part of the anti-conservative crackdown, or you could say purge, that's going on right now. They're going to go through apparently all the phones of all the government workers in South Korea to find out who supported the former president's coup attempt a year ago, for example. So there's a huge purge going on in Korea right now, and this seems to be a part of that. Currently, both defamation by false statement and insult are limited only to cases where a specific individual is identified as the victim and do not acknowledge insults or defamation against targeting a group. Perpetrators and participants in anti-China rallies are exploiting this legal loophole, lawmakers said in this proposal. Well, so I guess this means that no one's going to be allowed to criticize the Unification Church, right? Is that right? Is that right? Is that right? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's still okay to criticize the Unification Church. Yes, yes, yes. At least that's what I expect. Momentum for reform is growing. With the Justice and Interior Ministers both voicing support for legislative revision. Interior and Safety Minister Yoon Ho-jung said during Monday's cabinet meeting that the problem of hate-filled banners is becoming serious. Oh no, the banners. Particularly political party banners are permitted under both the Outdoor Advertising Act and the Political Parties Act, which requires a legal amendment, Hangul reported. Hangul is another newspaper. His remarks were echoed by the defense minister, who said such displays not only have negative educational effects, but also trigger hatred toward political parties. The law should be revised so that parties act responsibly, according to the Hangul newspaper. So anyway, they're going to be cracking down on these things. And so they're going to apply the current defamation laws, anti-defamation laws, to groups as well as individuals. Right now it's against individuals. And the way it works with individuals is that even if what you say is true, you could still be charged with defamation, because there are two types of defamation under the current law. One is, of course, when you say something that is false, but the other is that you say something that is true, but you can still be charged with harming a person's public reputation, even if what you say is true. Yeah. So a guy can go to court and say, that guy over there, he said I'm a dirty rat. And yes, I'm a dirty rat, but he does not have the right to go around saying that, because then everybody will know that I'm a dirty rat, and I don't want people to know that I'm a dirty rat. That is literally the way that the defamation laws work. So, I guess the Chinese government can come in and say, yes, we do harvest organs from live people and use organ harvesting as a form of execution. But nobody has a right to go around telling people that. The fact that what you say is true is not a total defense in Korea. I've had some experience with that in the past. All right, and here, let me just do one more story on the China thing. China and South Korea's mutual visa-free policy fueled tourism surge, right? This is also, from, what is this, tourism.review.com, tourism review. I'm not sure who wrote this. It may also be a communist, I'm not sure. But as Seoul's autumnal foliage dances across ancient palaces. Did an AI write this? I don't know. And harvest moons illuminate Beijing's alleyways. The passport stamp's absence is revolutionizing travel between China and South Korea. Experts see these reciprocal visa relaxations as prime examples of mutually beneficial cooperation, stimulating a surge in tourism that invigorates businesses and significantly boosts both economies. Well, it is true that South Korea is relying more and more on tourists from China to stimulate its economy. All right. Well, I don't have time to go through all this, and it's probably just as good. Okay. All right. Gotta go. I'll see you tomorrow. God bless Godspeed. May his kingdom come quickly.